Continue with the meeting. The Draft Canals Act 1986 Amendment Bylaws 2014 is aimed at providing better management of residential boats. It will also facilitate the modernisation of the charging regime and the introduction of a fixed penalty notice to give effect to the powers granted in the 2005 Maritime Safety Act. However, concerns have been expressed that the new bylaws are not fully fit for purpose, and this is why we have invited the witnesses here today. I hope this discussion will allow us to review the proposed Act and to identify any areas that need to be looked at again and recommend any changes that may be necessary. I would now call on Ms Livingston to address the committee.
Thank you. I wish to thank the committee for inviting me to attend this afternoon to discuss the proposed canal bylaws and the Lia Vena. I welcome the opportunity to hear the views of the committee members on the proposed bylaws. I do not propose to repeat all of the points that were made in the opening remarks. However, I would like to outline some background information before we discuss these matters in detail. Waterways Ireland is one of 6 North-South implementation bodies established under the British-Irish Agreement Act of 1999. Its statutory function is to manage, maintain, develop and restore 7 inland navigable waterways, principally for recreational purposes. We also deliver a very active marketing and promotion for the navigations, and it is now estimated that the private boating sector is worth between 80 million to 100 million per annum to the economy. Since its establishment in 1999, the number of boats registered with Waterways Ireland has increased by more than 50% to some 14,000 craft. The proposed bylaws relate to 3 of the 7 waterways: the Royal Canal, the Grand Canal and the Barrow Navigation. And there are now some 500 boats registered on these 3 systems. Waterways Ireland has invested on behalf of the taxpayer over 50 million in the infrastructure of these 3 waterways. New and improved facilities have been provided, and service blocks with toilets, showers continue to be developed in strategic locations as funds permit. That investment has both reopened these waterways and made them attractive for boat owners, and is helping to develop them as vibrant recreational and tourist amenities. The current bylaws have been in place since the 1980s, and of course in that time a lot has changed. By updating the rules governing use of the waterways, Waterways Ireland is seeking to ensure that they are fit for purpose and best meet the needs of all waterway users. The details are set out in the documentation that I sent to the committee, but I would like to briefly outline the 8 principal proposed changes. The first of these is it is proposed to introduce a new visitor permit to encourage boats to come onto the canals. This would allow free cruising and passage through locks for a period of 30 days, mooring for up to 5 days in any one location. To stay on the canal system for longer than 30 days, a boat owner would have to purchase a combined mooring and passage permit at a cost of €130, this being a modest increase of €4 on the current charge of €126, which has remained unchanged for 24 years. This permit allows a boat to use the canals, moor for up to 5 days in any one location and pass through the lock gates, allowing holders to spend up to a year on the canals. The cost of the extended mooring permit would rise from the current flat rate of €152 to a charge of between €160 to a maximum of €1,600 per annum, depending on the location, services and length of boat. The extended mooring permit in the Grand Canal dock would cost a proposed fee of €2,500 per annum. The extended mooring permit allows the use of a mooring identified by Waterways Ireland on the canals, where a boat may permanently moor for up to a year. Waterways Ireland has identified 50 sites for potential extended mooring locations throughout the 3 canals and mapped and published these on its website. The new bylaws also introduce a new houseboat mooring permit, which would be introduced with the proposed cost ranging from €1,250 for a location such as Shannon Harbour to €3,500 per annum in a city centre location such as the Grand Canal dock. Currently, Waterways Ireland has 6 houseboat moorings in Shannon Harbour with access for mooring, water and electric. Work on a project costing in excess of $500,000 is underway in Solans to enhance the moorings in the village and again provide a number of houseboat moorings with facilities. And further houseboat moorings will be provided in the future. The proposed bylaws also propose to update the fees to pass through the major locks in Dublin from a current fee of 64 cents to a proposed fee of €25. The fee to pass through Camden Lock is proposed to increase to €25 compared to the current charge of €12.70. And there would also be a toll of €25 per boat to raise Newcomen Bridge. To put this last fee in context, Waterways Ireland paid €10,000 to CIE last year for a total of 8 lifts of the Newcomen Bridge. It is further proposed to update the fees for dry dock facilities. The current fee to use a dry dock is €13.90 per day. This is too low to encourage effective use of these limited and valuable facilities, as it is cheaper to put a boat in a dry dock and leave it there than lift it out and store it on hard standing. The new charge proposed is €50 for the first 7 days, increasing to €75 for the next 7 days, and then €100 per day thereafter. This fee structure is to encourage owners to plan repair work effectively and do what is necessary in the dry dock, and then remove their boat and leave the facility available for the next user. The proposed bylaws also introduce a Barrow open fishing boat licence with an annual fee of €50, and this will enable Waterways Ireland to provide for and regulate this use of the Barrow. Finally, the proposed bylaws would also introduce a fixed payment notice. This was provided for in the 2005 Maritime Safety Act, but a bylaw amendment is required to make this available for use. The fixed penalty fine is €150 or prosecution, and this has been introduced to provide Waterways Ireland with another deterrent to boat owners who persistently breach the bylaws. There are other changes, but these 8 are the principal ones. I recognise that these big changes, in some cases, will affect a small number of houseboat owners who have been accustomed to a largely unregulated system up to now. However, it is no longer feasible to facilitate boat owners in tying up permanently or for extended periods in locations of their own choosing, where this use is not compatible with meeting the needs of other canal users or with health and safety or environmental considerations. I believe that boat owners accept the need for a modern regulatory framework governing long-term stays and other issues, in the same way as we have arrangements governing our road system and housing sector. And they also accept that there is a need to update the bylaws to take account of changes that have occurred since they were introduced 24 years ago, when there was no provision or thought of houseboats. What Waterways Ireland is trying to achieve is a reasonable balance between the various competing needs that have to be accommodated in this area. In that regard, the Canals Act provided for a statutory consultation period of 21 days when new bylaws are proposed. This was carried out earlier than this year, and all of the interest groups were notified in advance, and all boat owners were mailed the consultation to draw it to their attention. And we were very pleased to receive over 2,000 submissions. Waterways Ireland will now give full and careful consideration to all of these submissions and the issues and changes that they have brought forward. We will prepare a report setting out our proposed approach, including revisions that we may suggest to our original proposals having regard to the submissions received. The report will be submitted to the Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and will then be referred to the Minister with recommendations for his consideration and final decision. As I said at the outset, I would be very glad to hear the views of committee members this afternoon on this issue.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms Livingston. And now call on Mr Dolan to address the committee.
We thank the Chair and members of the committee for inviting us here today. The Inland Waterways Association of Ireland, or IWI for short, represents over 3,000 enthusiastic members with 22 branches across the island of Ireland. IWI was founded in 1954 as a voluntary body to campaign for the future of the Shannon navigation. In the 1960s, the IWI campaigned to prevent the Grand Canal in Dublin City from being turned into sewerage infrastructure. And now, 50 years later, we are campaigning again to save the canals and Barrow in terms of their navigation potential. The IWI regrettably advises that the proposed amendments to the Canal Byelaws do not, and we repeat, do not put users' requirements, local communities or tourism at the centre of the regulations. In relation to the canals and barrow navigation, two important issues must be noted. Firstly, unlike the other navigation systems, there are no private mooring provisions or service providers. Waterways Ireland are a monopoly and there is no choice for boaters. Secondly, the canals are effectively linear waterways with specific issues and challenges, such as low water levels, weed issues, obstructions underwater and in locks. Thus, travel on the canals tend to be lengthy tours of duty, so to speak, rather than short cruises. And this travel is typically done on weekends over a period of months, such on trips like the Green and Silver route promoted by Dublin IWAI. The proposed Canal Bylaw amendments are not compatible with current boating practices on the canals. They are more reflective of boating practices on the River Shannon and lakes. They do not take into account the difficulties and challenges of canal boating. So why do boaters travel the canals? The Royal and Grand Canals and the Barrow navigations are a magnificent marriage of nature and early engineering feats. They reveal beautiful, picturesque navigations that wind their way through wooded valleys, peatlands, villages, townlands, bigger towns, and our capital city. They link the north, south, east, and west of the Ireland's navigation systems, as you can see from the chart in our submission, including the Shannon, the Erne, the Liffey, the Suir, and the Nore, all accessible by boat through the canals and the Barrow. There are the emotions and the magic of canal travel. The slow pace echoed by a speed limit of 4 miles per hour. Yes, 4 miles per hour. People move faster than the canal boats on the system. Couple this with the serenity, the peace, the discovery, the nature, the magic of a night under the stars with only a few locks away from the big city and the bright lights. There are also, unfortunately, the adventure in between. At some areas being targeted by unsocial behaviour or delayed for hours trying to remove obstructions from the canal or from the props on your boat. It's not all plain sailing. Our submission lists our concerns, which we are happy to expand on later, and these include downgrading the original combined mooring and passage permit, the 5-day rule changes, no specific winter mooring provided similar to the Shannon, lack of selection criteria or consultation on extended mooring, houseboat management, dry dock tolls and proposed penalties of €150 per day. The three navigations total 336 kilometres. Issues have arisen in less than a handful of places due to location. The length of waterways affected by these areas is a couple of kilometres, less than 1%. So bylaws that would be detrimental to 99% are being introduced to address the issues in less than 1% of the system. Some may view aspects of the bylaws on their own as reasonable, but they impose a huge burden and risk collectively, with no evidence presented publicly as to what risk analysis has been done in relation to these proposals, or why only one user group is being targeted for payment. The proposed bylaw approach is one of taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut without taking into account the mess that will be left behind. IWI has a long history of working with various statutory bodies, including Waterways Ireland, and we appeal to the regulators to listen to the boat users' voices, clamouring to be heard, along with the communities and international organisations. These collectively submitted over 2,000 responses to Waterways Ireland on their consultation period of only 21 days. Other users are also to be welcomed: bikers, hikers, anglers, paddlers, but never at the expense of the lifeblood of the navigation, the vessels that keep the waterways open. Irish boaters, communities and occasional visitors have helped keep these navigations active and open. It is time now to expose them for national and international tourism. With appropriate promotion, management and community engagement, they can be a vibrant recreational resort for the 21st century, users linking slow tourism with invaluable industrial, archaeological and environment legacies. They can be a world-class branded waterway route, similar to the Lakes of Killarney, the Norfolk Broads, the Four Rings, Counties Ring in England and the Lakes of Canada. So to conclude, the canals and barrow navigation need proper bylaws that put user requirements, local communities and tourism at the centre of the regulations, and not be suffocated by excessive and badly written regulations. I thank you for listening to us, Gail.
Thank you for your opening statement, Mr. Dolan. I now call on Mr. Tracy to address the committee.
Sorry, I had...
It's Mr. Roach. Mr. Roach to address the committee.
Thank you for the invitation to address the committee on these issues. Again, I would not propose to go through the written statement we put in detail, but just to highlight some aspects of it, and then we would be delighted to answer any questions arising. Briefly, the Heritage Boat Association was established in 2001, and we are a specialist niche group, if you like, who represent a group of owners of heritage boats, the majority of which have their origins on the Grand and Royal Canals as working boats. So consequently, these are, whereas we are distributed throughout the waterways, these are navigations that are near and dear to our heart and that we regularly use as part of our touring and cruising activities. Indeed, the association was founded in 2001 when 4 barges made the journey from the Shannon to Dublin to be launched by the then Minister, Sheila de Valera, for the association, to be launched by the then Minister at that time. And that was a journey fraught with many a challenge to which Mr. Dolan has already referred. We're pleased to say that we are recognise the progress that has been made in improving the canals in that period. We had the pleasure of bringing 9 barges last year in the Royal Canal and back out the Grand Canal and what is well known as the Green and Silver route. And we would like to acknowledge the assistance we had from Waterways Ireland staff in undertaking what is a very, very demanding journey, even though the boats were made for those navigations, but we do appreciate the support we had. Our objectives include promoting the use, preservation and restoration of heritage boats. And we have, as we said, a particular interest in the canals. In the course of our activities, we seek to engage to the maximum degree possible with communities through joint activities, cultural and otherwise, and also to engage with state organisations such as Waterways Ireland. We do have some concerns about aspects of the bylaws, but rather than refer to them in a general sense, if I may, I'll just briefly touch on the headings that Ms. Livingston has mentioned, because they are, if you like, the devil being in the detail. It is key to unlocking any problem to go through those. And we would again acknowledge that we've had what we believe was a constructive exchange with Waterways Ireland a number of years ago, where, if we're correct in our assessment, we feel we were carefully and attentively listened to, and obviously we look forward with great hope and optimism to having impacted many of the proposals that will come out in the final documentation. If I take the items in sequence, the 5-day rule causes us great difficulty. We do believe that 5 days as a general mooring period for boats in transit is not practical on a canal. When a boat cruises on the River Shannon, it is, unless it's undertaking, as we will this year, a trip to Northern Ireland through the Shannon system as a group, but if it's normally cruising in and around its own domestic location, it'll be within a few hours of its mooring, or maybe a day or two of its mooring. So if a boater has a difficulty and has to leave their boat, they can leave it on the 5-day rule in the Shannon somewhere, or they may well have the opportunity to get back to their harbour. When you're somewhere west of or east of Loch 12 on the Grand Canal, or east of Mullingar or whatever, that type of luxury doesn't exist, because the pace of travel on the canal and the difficulty with locking and so on means that in a linear sense you can be quite a distance away. And also the journey time over which you would make such a trip as we made last year on the Green and Silver requires such a commitment of several months travelling at weekends for people who have a day job as well. It means that you will come unstuck at some stage of that journey and have to leave the boat somewhere longer than expected. So we would strongly urge that that's a period of time that needs to be re-examined and made specific to the canals. The cruising permit, we would just make the comment that we would prefer to see that, and we can expand on this later, we prefer to see it as a lock passage permit rather than as a cruising permit. Mooring, we have asked Waterways Ireland to consider the merits of a winter permit. There are arrangements on the Shannon where boats can moor on a special arrangement in public harbours during the winter months when traffic is low, by payment of a fee to Waterways Ireland, and we would ask that that be given consideration for the canal. On extended mooring, again, a small point of detail I would like to make first on that is that we would like, where people apply for an extended mooring permit, that they be given the facility to use that permit in more than one of the 50 locations in any given year, that it be transferable, perhaps by arrangement, but that it be transferable between different locations. The mooring charges, we believe that when you look at the upper end of the charges, the figures become quite heavy, quite a heavy burden on a boat owner, but it's unclear to us what the application of those charges may be, and we've made the point to Waterways Ireland that it is difficult for us to comment in detail until such time as we see how the schedule might apply. We have some idea of the criteria, but we would welcome seeing how they would be applied, and I think that may well have been taken on board as something to be addressed in the next phase. For our boats, because many of you, only those in the room who are similar age to Mr. Tracy and myself, maybe recall them when they were workboats on the canals, but you will recall that they're 61 feet by 13 feet typically. So for us to be subject to a regime where length was a criterion for stating or for calculating the charge for a given boat would cause us a difficulty, because the heritage boats which belong to the canal, if you like, would be the most penalised. So we have asked for consideration for a derogation for heritage boats in that regard, if a length criterion is to be applied. The houseboats, again, I would make the comment that the charges need to be assessed against market value, but more detail needs to be available on how they would be applied in particular locations. The Liffey transit charges we have a difficulty with. It's quite a task to get across the Liffey, and in particular, we don't like using the expression having difficulties in principle. We do have some difficulty in principle with paying a fee to go under Newcommon Bridge, because Newcommon Bridge is actually blocking the navigation. It has been built, if you like, outside the parameters of the criteria laid down in the guidebooks for the height of clearance under a bridge. So we do believe that whereas there is a charge from one state body to another for that, we believe that issue should be addressed in a way other than putting a levy on boaters. The dry dock, again, because of the nature of our boats and the tasks that you have to undertake to restore one or to maintain it during its life, there are a number of major refurbishments that have to be done during the life of one of those boats, during the refurbishment. And the length of time taken to do that is quite substantial in a number of cases. The cost on the new schedule would simply be prohibitive. A number of us would, for example, without getting into too much technical detail, but we would have done major works to replate the bilges of our boats because they've been worn from working for years in the canal. And I know that I did a retrospective calculation, having done that a number of years ago. If I were to do that today with my boat under these charges, it would cost about €11,000 for docking fees, which is more than the steel. Again, we've made this point to Waterways Ireland, and we feel that our point was certainly understood, and we're hoping that that is going to be reflected in whatever comes out at the end of the day. And in regard to, I have two other issues I would make, comments I would make in regard to the elements of the bylaws themselves. One has to do with the fixed payment notice, which at 150 is more than I would get for 2 penalty points on a dual carriageway if I was unlucky enough. We feel it's a very substantial figure, but our greater concern to us even than that is that the only method of challenging it seems to be to go to the courts and to risk a €5,000 fine. If we read the documentation correctly, we believe that there's a strong case for some intermediate appeals process on that, if it were to apply. And finally, there is, we have had, and we would acknowledge that we've had a very pragmatic working relationship with Waterways Ireland on issues, because there are always issues when you move a large fleet of boats or when you move individually as a boater on the canal or elsewhere. And we find that they have been quite positive in working with us on resolving any issues that arise. However, we don't see that reflected, the spirit of that reflected. Now, we recognise that legislation is the hard fact, but we do believe that the treatment of events, for example, or the discretion to give to recognise special circumstances as they arise is something we would like to see as empowered within whatever would come out, so that if we ever did at some future point dealing with different personalities in Waterways Ireland than the accommodating ones we've worked with, we've something to wave at them. So we'd welcome something that acknowledges that formally. But we do recognise the context that Ms Livingston has outlined for these, and we'd be delighted to discuss any detail in the committee today. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you for your opening statement, Mr. Roach. Members have had a request from Deputy James Bannon that he might commence with questioning because he's under time pressure this afternoon. Is this agreed?
So am I, but anyway.
Yes. Deputy Bannon and followed by Deputy Cannon.
Thanks very much. I'd like to welcome the personnel from both in the Waterways Association of Ireland, indeed Waterways Ireland, to our meeting and the further comprehensive presentation. As we all know, this is a recreation asset for the people of this country and has been for decades, and it's important that we keep these waterways open, accessible and indeed usable for all of our people. And we don't want to see a situation where bylaws closes our canal and bans the boating from the same. And I have walked huge stretches. In fact, I live in the Canal Valley, quite close to Abbeyshrew. That area has been got a lot of public recognition by way of tidy towns, both national and international in recent times, and the aqueduct there in Abbeyshrew, which is fairly unique in the country. And I mean, a lot of the bridges have been named after company directors and people who constructed the canal, etc. And there's a great gel with people who live in the general area and have been using stretches of the canal and probably prevented it from becoming a weed-filled dike even prior to the major reconstruction and the opening process started. It's part of our marvellous heritage, and indeed I'd like to compliment RT the other night to put on a documentary there on the tranquility of the canal, and it gave a great insight into the solitude and the peacefulness of the whole area as a recreational area. Indeed, I mean, it has been used for years for fishing and boating and canoeing, etc. And it's a huge rural tourism project, and it is the historic linking of Dublin and the Midlands. I mean, I think it's what 146 kilometres in length from Dublin back down to Clondra, and you know, it was commenced back in 17, the construction of it in 1789 and completed in 1817. And the development of the railway system back shortly after being completed signalled the slow death count of the Royal Canal, and we don't want to see a situation where bylaws would close it for the second time, because that's what will happen if those very stringent bylaws go ahead. And I think that we need to send the changes to the Canal Bylaw document and its proposals back to Waterways Ireland. No disrespect to you, Don, but I feel for a total reconsideration. I think, and that's my opinion, and that's the views of many people that I have met during the course of this whole discussion. I mean, the proposed bylaws and the amendments to it, it was a very short time span given to people to make submissions. It was sprung on them back in January, and I think in late January and in early January, and the date closed some before the beginning, or in around the beginning of February. And you know, communities were using the canal, the word gelled into tuned into you know, the extent of the problems this would cause to people, and particularly the canal across the Midlands. The proposed 5-day rule is going to have a very, very serious impact into local usage of the canal, and it won't be possible to navigate the system with this in place. And it's something that I would like to see looked upon and dealt with in a more sympathetic way to the users of the canal. Also, I mean, there's a lot more issues that needs to be addressed in relation to mooring areas along the canal, development of slipways and harbours, etc. It needs to be looked at in great detail. And also, I know that we have been successful in relation to the Royal Canal getting considerable funding from the Department of the Environment and Sport and that for the development of the banks of the canal, which is greatly used by walkers, etc. All in all, I want to see this developed as a public resource, and I feel that the bylaws as presented to us is going to have a detrimental effect on the future of this fine tourism community, and I feel that, and I don't know what backing I would get, but I would be proposing that we send the changes to the Canal Bylaw document back to Waterways Ireland for total reconsideration. I think you have to start and look at it from a very practical point of view, because what's proposed is going to close the canal. That's my opinion. Because it's people who haven't a lot, local people, who have been the guardians of the canal for generations when it wasn't in use. Those were the people that were using, and those people are low income, etc. And they won't be in a position to use this facility, and there's quite an annoyance, and you need to bring public support with you when you develop a tourism infrastructure in this country.
Thank you, Deputy Bannon. Would you care to respond, Ms. Livingston?
Yes, first of all, to thank the Deputy for his comments and to assure him that it's not our intention to destroy the use of the canals. These bylaws are in addition to the very extensive set of the 1988 bylaws, and they contain the provision for anyone to seek the Commissioner's permission to stay beyond the 5-day rule. And the 5-day rule didn't change from the old bylaws to the new bylaws, but it's been very clear from the consultation that people see the 5 days as an issue, and that's something that we'll actively look at addressing. I'd also like to assure the Deputy that the charging you can portray the worst case scenario. So you can take the top, the €1,600, the 2,500 for the Grand Canal Dock, but they're specifically designed to provide a choice for people. So those with modest means can buy €126, use the canal for a year. It's a very modest fee. It's going up by €4. Equally, they can choose an extended mooring. There'll be lots of them at the €160. Overall, it's not a huge fee in terms of being able to leave your boat permanently on a canal and use it for the year. And it was noted in some of the earlier presentations that there has been no private inward investment on the canals. And one of the reasons for that is that the charging is so low. And equally, it was pointed out that we're a monopoly and we own all of the canals, and therefore there's a public duty on us to see that there is a range and a choice. And these bylaws were designed to future-proof the canals, so it's wrong to assume that the top charge is automatically going to be applied. But I would like to close by assuring them that it is our intention not to make the canals less accessible to people. It was mentioned in the earlier presentations as well that, it's only 1% is the problem. Unfortunately, the problem we're trying to address is that boats are clustered in the honey spots. So they're clustered in Lowtown, clustered in Salons, clustered in villages, where if you were out cruising, you would wish to be able to pull in with your boat for the afternoon, get out, spend some money in the village, have a drink, have a meal, and those places aren't accessible. And that's part of this whole process of introducing permits. And we are very much for supporting people who are touring the green and silver route. All of the boat users who use the canals at present will know that you can leave your boat for extended periods. It's only a matter of letting us know what you're doing. It's a small system. Our lockkeepers know who's making the journey. And boats aren't left for 5 days. They're quite often left for 2 or 3 weeks, because we know people have gone home, they've made a phone call. What we're asking is that you don't leave it in a prime location. You move it to a mooring and you leave those central locations free for traffic touring, because that's what we're trying to encourage. Hence the visitor permit, encouraging people to come onto canals, more boats to use them, and get that movement of traffic. But I'd like to thank you for your comments.
We don't want to see development in areas, an us and them attitude, you know. I think you need to provide this information to people who have been part of the area, who see the canal as part of their heritage and that. And I think the manner of disseminating information to date hasn't been great, because there is a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of annoyance up and down the countryside in relation to what's going to happen by way of bylaws.
Thank you, Deputy Bannon. Deputy Cowan.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. First of all, can I thank all the groups for their presentation, and thank the committee for acquiescing to my request that this committee would cater for such a discussion in order for ourselves and others to be well informed of the process that has taken place to date, and for the potential assimilation of that information and ultimately the provision of new guidelines which are in draft form at present, as have been acknowledged. First of all, can I agree with what has been said by previous speakers in relation to the investment that has taken place in our canals in recent years, over the last number of years by both governments and Inland Waterways, and to acknowledge that contribution, that commitment. And we greatly appreciate, those of us who live in the vicinity, the improvements that have been made, and the benefit that is not only to users and to the localities for which they pass through, but also to allow the general public see the sort of potential that exists on our canals for further recreational facilities can be explored and are clearly more visible in the context of the improved facilities that are there presently and over the last number of years. While that is the case, and I acknowledge that there has to be a means by which much of this is to be paid for, not only the work that has taken place heretofore, but other improvements that you would like to see in future years also. And I acknowledge that that is the case, and that has to be, taken into consideration. However, the amount of submissions that you've had, and I was greatly informed in my local, the Offaly branch of the IAWI, as was other public representatives in our county, of the scale of the proposals that are contained within the drafts. And I would contend that the majority of the submissions that you've received are of the same mind in that regard. And I would hope that that being the case, and I would support the submissions, especially by those of IAWI, and also in relation to those that represent the heritage boats which need permanent moorings too. There has to be a point whereby there can be a negotiated agreement or settlement, rather than one being imposed against the wishes of those who have made such a vast amount of submissions and what is contained within it. And I'm conscious also of the success in this pleasure boating area on the Shannon, and the differences that exist between the sort of charges that there are between the two, and there has to be greater synergy, I would believe, by virtue of bringing the sort of costs involved in both cases more in line with one another. But I'm especially conscious, as I said, that there be an effort on the part of Inland Waterways and the departments who have responsibility in this area to bring together the stakeholders with a view to agreeing for progress to be made in relation to the provision and the installation of new guidelines. But as I said, only having gone through a consultative process and a consultation process that can be agreed on its completion, and where all parties then can agree to move forward, rather than what is feared at present by many of those whom I've spoken to and I've had speak to me at public meetings and so forth, that there is a fear that this will be imposed without the sort of consultation or conciliation or agreement that might emanate from that process, and that they will feel pushed out of the activity that they've grown up with and love and wish to pass on to other generations and indeed to other aspects of the community in order for the local economies and the tourist activities that it can generate and the income that it can provide to be explored on a greater basis. So in conclusion, again, I thank everybody. I acknowledge the standpoint from which you are coming, whether it be Inland Waterways or IAWI and the other parties here today. But there has to be, everyone has the same intention for there to be a successful conclusion and for there to be progress and greater appreciation of the facilities into the future, which can benefit all. And I think if we can do that on a conciliatory basis and do it in an all-encompassing basis, I think we have the potential for everybody to succeed into the future. So I would ask that whatever powers that be can use their influence in order for there to be a mechanism put in place to allow meaningful negotiation with a view to a successful conclusion emanating from that.
Thank you, Deputy Cohen. The next questioner is Senator Keane.
Thank you very much, and I want to welcome everybody here today. And indeed, I have long admired the work of Waterways Ireland and the work that you do, and I think always and quoted it as well as being one of the few bodies that was set up under the North-South Agreement. And it, as you said yourself in your when you were introducing it, you know, waters have no boundaries, and they do. So the first question I would have would be, obviously, the submissions and the 2,000, somebody mentioned, I think it was John Dolan that mentioned there was 2,000 submissions in. I don't think you did mention it yourself in your submission. I checked your site, but they're not up on your own site as far as I know. I'm asking the questions, are they up? And if they're not, will the submissions be put up for the public to view on your site? Because I do think you're doing good work. The Heritage Association, boats are doing good work, and the Waterways Association, all. And I think, and myself included, you know, that there is a lot of misinformation around and maybe misunderstandings around on charges in particular, because I watched the programme as well that Deputy Bannon referred to there on RTE, and I saw one woman, I think it was in Clondalk, and I'm not quite sure, but it was, as far as I know, on the canal, and she had her houseboat and lived in it for 30 years. And she was fearful that that was the end of it. You know, she wouldn't be able to afford, I think it was a fee of 3,500 she mentioned, or something like that. And, you know, you come today and say, well, you know, there aren't going to be exorbitant fees. There will be houseboats. There will be room. So I do think there's an urgent need for clarification on what is proposed by the Waterways Ireland, and in interpretation from the presentations we've seen here today, obviously recognising the work you're doing, but saying that for 99% of the people will be affected. There's only 1% of the people who should be affected, and that's a consideration of, I think the terminology John Dolan used was using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and that's what we don't want to do. Obviously, we recognise that bylaws, and I was on council long enough dealing with bylaws back and over on different things, be it on parks or whatever. They do have to change. They do have to move with the times. Obviously, charges have to change and move with times as well, not to an exorbitant or a prohibitive amount. And that is what I would be asking to ensure that people. It is on my to-do list, because I think it's one of the best facilities that we have in Ireland are our canals. To get into a boat and go down there for a week, you know, and enjoy it. I envy everybody that. Oh, with it, what? We'll all come out. Well, I wish I had a boat, but I don't. But anyway, not to worry. No, but I do think it should be facilitated in every way possible. I know when I was on South Dublin County Council myself, and I brought up the issue, and it has changed now, but planning laws always turned their backs on the canals. They didn't use or utilise the beauty and the facilities that is the canal. And it is only of recent years that planners have look forward and look towards the canal and looked into and look at the beauty that is there. And we want to ensure that that is maintained, and that's what you're doing. And it was one of your own proposals, I think, back years ago as well, in one of the documents that you did put forward on planning, that the vistage and beauty of the canals would be utilised in that way. And question, the pricing structure, obviously, we need more information on it, and exactly who's going to be affected by what, when and where. And obviously this debate is not going to finish today, because it is your consultation process is out there. There was a consideration, and one thing that was put to me, that it was a very short time period, that was allowed. But I must congratulate the boat owners and everybody that made submissions, because 2,000 submissions in 21 or in 20, I think it was days. If we got that for other public consultations, we'd be doing very well, So obviously it is a very the boat owners are very exercised, and when I see that amount of submissions coming in from the public, I say to myself, there's something wrong here, and I have the question of 99% versus 1% in my head. Again, it's either Andy or John who mentioned that your considerations didn't take into account public, local communities, tourism, or basically, and I would be fearful if that was true, because my dealings in the past with Waterways Ireland I was of the impression, and indeed have the Box on the Docks facility, which is the brilliant visitor centre there that you provide for visitors to show what you have. I think it's closed at the moment for the season or something, but it's a facility that everybody, and I don't know, maybe the Environment Committee should visit it as well. It's only 10 minutes walking down the road, and it gives a brilliant picture of the work you do. As well as that, I think it should be promoted more among school children as well, to ensure that they get a love of their own heritage and works. I have a few. The question on...
You have the online submissions and the pricing structure, isn't it?
Am I only allowed to many
No,
questions?
you can ask more, but...
Yeah, the 5-day rule, and if it is, like you say, it is not going to be as onerous as my interpretation of it, because, and again, I am taking a quote from somebody who said, if I have to get back to my boat and get out there, he said, I won't bring out my boat at all because I won't be able to physically do it. And the turnaround period is too short. Yet you say today, if they contact you and they make, are there exceptions to the rule? And if there are, we should know about them, because the interpretation I think made by many people is that the 5-day rule is sacrosanct and it's not workable for a lot of people. The charges I've mentioned as well. The Liffey Transit charge, and it's one we'll have to look at, because you could say if it's free, to go over the Liffey, and if it's free or charged to go under it, or whatever, that is there an unfairness there on traffic versus, I think boating, if we were using more up and down the Liffey to alleviate the pollution, we'd be better off. That's one thing. As well as that, the derogation for the heritage boats. I'm not quite sure of what Andy Roach was looking for there in that derogation. Was it a free-for-all for derogation of heritage boats, or maybe you would get more?
I have to cut you in there because we have another witness coming at 4 o'clock.
And
I have four more questioners.
Yeah. The process of implementation, I think, is important, and it was just something I picked up when one of the last speakers said that, be fearful that this process and the proposals would be implemented without further recommendations. I could ask for confirmation from the chair to outline the process and say those are proposals. They are proposals from you to change the bylaws. The actual process of carrying out the implementation of the bylaws, if the chairperson could outline that, it would be helpful as well, because I think that will alleviate it. And to say that we will have another day of this and say come back, because I did notice when Mr. Roach was making his proposals that he did say he had cooperation from Waterways Ireland on submissions that he had made, and he looked forward to changes, and that is what consultation is about. That's what we're about here today. I'll have a lot of questions, but I don't have the time, but we'll have another day, hopefully. Thank you.
So there was a few questions in relation to online submissions, pricing structure, 5-day rule. Who's going to answer those?
Well, thank you. In terms of the online submissions, all of the submissions, we would be very happy to publish those. They came in a number of distinct categories. There was 2 sort of standard letters which were signed as a petition, and then we had some very excellent and meaningful, quite lengthy submissions from various interest groups, and I certainly be very happy to make those available online. I'll follow with the process. The process is that it is now, we've also, as well as the submissions, had meetings with the key stakeholders, which the Heritage Boat Association have referred to, also with the Inland Waterways Association, the Irish Charter Boat Association, and it is a process of consultation. The 5-day rule existed before. Also existed before and still exists with the new bylaws is the Commissioner's discretion, which can be used, but there are a number of key things have come up. One of them is the 5-day rule, and that's something that we'll actively be looking at when we're considering the revision of the proposals, which will go to the Minister.
Anybody else want to comment on Senator Keane's questions? If not, I'll move on.
Just in terms of
Mr. Whelan.
Gregory Whelan in the Waterways Association, In terms of the 5-day rule and discretion, is something that we would be very uncomfortable with. We've seen today the culmination of a commissioner's discretion. So I think we would see that there should be, as you say, Senator, a defined process around that exception, and that's something that we could work with. But there is, as you say yourself, the need for a clear, concise exceptions and how they could arise. Thank you.
Murphy.
Yeah, I think first of all, my constituency is Kildare North, so both the Royal and Grand Canal would be part of it, and be very familiar with the like of Hazelhatch and Sallins in particular. And Sallins is the one that is very obvious in terms of the the number of boats that are moored there almost constantly. I'm less concerned about the numbers involved. I think it's principle that's the key issue. And it does seem like the approach has been the one-size-fits-all is not going to work. I think there's a vast difference if you go and look at the kind of craft that are on the Shannon in comparison to what's the kind of people and the kind of craft that are on the canals. And I think there's a fair point being made here in relation to people may well have made different decisions in their lives if they thought that they were going to end up paying a very large amount of money annually for the type of lifestyle that they had chosen. And yes, it hasn't been regulated for a long time, or it hasn't been regulated, or the regulations haven't been enforced. But I think that there has got to be some fair consideration of people and their ability to pay where they have that as a lifestyle. I think the reason we were quite keen to have some dialogue with the various groups fairly early is because there is quite a tight time frame on the introduction, if I'm right in that, on the bylaws. And could I ask if there is going to be some relaxation or the ability to relax these rules to buy some time to give further consideration. I think I think that was a fair point that was made in relation to the recourse appears only to the courts. And could you maybe comment on what are there ideas in relation to that? I think it's unfair, given that the courts are not really available to people, particularly people who would be, would have very limited means. And I think that the introduction of some sort of an appeals mechanism would be quite useful. I noted that the rules will impact more heavily on a small number of people. We do want, one of the things I remember going out on the Royal Canal with the Royal Canal Community Group, and one of the big criticisms they had at the time, it would have been in the Leixlip Maynooth area, was that the lack of navigation was causing obviously the inability to navigate that particular section because of the weed and all the rest of it that grows up when you don't have constant movement on it, and it wouldn't be an area that gets a lot of certainly not as much as parts of the Grand Canal. One of the criticisms that's come across from a lot of groups that have made contact with us is that the proposed bylaws really don't put the user requirement centre stage, and we're listening to some very practical difficulties about the 5-day rule. I'd like to hear whether or not, I think we're not going to resolve it here today, but I just would like to hear if there's a willingness to extend the time and to consider that particular aspect of it. But I think that is the area that's going to cause most difficulties. The amount of money, it's £3,500, and the ability to pay, I think is a reasonable point for people to make, where they don't have an alternative to it at this point. I was just wondering, would there be, are you going to look at that, or will you consider looking at that again?
Certainly, I want to assure you that we're involved in a genuine consultation and that we will be looking at all of the key points that have been made and articulated both in person by the groups we've met and in the written submissions. And that will include the 5-day rule. The £3,500 for the fee for a houseboat berth is in the Grand Canal docks, and there were no boats in that until a number of years ago, so there's no one residing there who has lived for an extended period of time in that location. And we've referred here to houseboats, but it's important to understand that while it's a small number of boats within even that group, there are very few individuals who live permanently on their vessel. There are people who live on their vessel for 3 or 4 months each summer, perhaps in the one location. Some go off and cruise and then come back. But we are aware of the individual circumstances for each person, and there is a range of charging within the proposals so that people have a choice. And we also, in other circumstances, have been open to things such as phased payments to make things affordable for people. So I would like to assure you that we are engaged in a genuine process of consultation and trying to get this right so that it does work. As I say, the 5-day rule is there because the 5-day rule was there before. But we appreciate the difficulty it's caused. Up until now, folks haven't moved every 5 days, but they've simply phoned the Inspector of Navigation to understay to say, I'll not be back for a fortnight, or I won't be down this weekend. Now, we understand from the consultation people's nervousness around that with the introduction of the €150 fixed penalty fine, whereas before, the only penalty available to Waterways Ireland was to remove your boat. But for us to remove your boat, it's probably at the end of at least a year-long process. We'll have visited you, stickered you, emailed you, written to you, visited you, telephoned you, and you know, there's lots of laws that 99.9% of the population never come in contact with because they live within the rules. And it's not certainly our intention. We're a recreational navigation authority. We manage by education and cooperation and liaison, and we work very closely with both the organisations here, and that's not going to change. But the fixed penalty notice does give us a cheaper option where somebody has just blatantly ignored us for months, years in some cases.
Mr. Kelly.
Very much. I'd like to welcome you here today and thank you very much for your presentations and congratulate you on the work that you do. Waterways Ireland played an essential role in tourism and development of waterways for tourism and for recreational purposes. No doubt that times change and organisations such as Waterways Ireland need to change with them to stay viable and build on their success. But the huge increases in some of the fees are unacceptable, and there's serious concern that the proposed fees will damage tourism and drive people from the very waterways that you serve. Also looking through the presentations, the 5-day rule, it doesn't appear to be practical. It's been stated here that, you know, some people work full-time, they have full-time jobs and may not be able to I suppose, go on their boat every weekend for one reason or another, and also that some local communities and small villages really benefit from having these people tie up and maybe stay on for longer periods. So I really do think that this 5-day rule needs to be re-examined, and also this discretion doesn't really work. I do agree. I think we need clear definition on it as well. Yes, another point again with read the derogation for heritage boats. I think that it's worrying that heritage boats could be charged most, and I think that's another aspect that needs to be re-examined. I suppose I have another few questions as well with regard to the increase in mooring capacity and registration of boats that would have increased your income. Would it have increased it by much, and would it not help offset some of the fee increases? has Waterways Ireland explored increased funding and grants to offset the need for some of the higher increases, and what extra services will people receive for the increased fees? Now, I know they haven't been increased, I think, since about 1984, but still, if people are paying more, they usually expect a better service. Another one there that I noticed, boats being abandoned. I just wonder, how often does that happen? How often do boats get abandoned on the canals? Is it a lot, or is it very rare? Just another point that I have here as well. After a meeting of the North-South Ministerial Council, plans for the establishment of a board for Waterways Ireland were not progressed. Will Waterways Ireland concede to the necessity for the establishment of a board for Waterways Ireland that includes stakeholder representation? And if so, could they outline a time frame for the establishment of this board?
Thank you, Rita.
Okay, thank you. First of all, to comment on abandoned boats, under the current regulatorily, can't speak, sorry, under the current framework, if you pay the combined mooring passage permit at €126, it's cheaper to abandon your boat than remove it. And you know, the charging isn't a lot, but there is a need for control. There is a need for people to register their boat and pay their fees. And we have been removing sunken and abandoned boats over the last 8 years. We've spent €178,000 in it, and it is still an ongoing process. There were 2 sunken boats removed from Shannon Harbour in February of this year. So it is an issue, and I think there isn't charging on the other waterways, but on the other waterways, boat owners, and you'll have the Inland Waterways representative, Heritage Boat here can verify this, people pay to put their boat in a private mooring, and that requires a fee of, it could be €400 to €1,000. That doesn't exist on the canal, so there isn't that management framework. So as I say, it was cheaper to abandon your boat. You know, boats got to the point where they changed hand in pubs at night, and then nobody owned them and they're just left, and we're coming behind and clearing it up. I have photographs, you know, of the type of things that we're removing, but as I said earlier, we manage through cooperation. We're a recreational authority. We're doing this as the very last resort, but that type of activity is dragging the canals down, as those who live close to them will know. In terms of a board, that's not a matter for the body, that is a matter for the North-South Ministerial Council.
Okay, so we have 4 questioners left, and we're pushed for time. There's another witness coming in at 4 o'clock. So I'm going to take the 4 questions together, and I'd appreciate if you could just ask questions. Deputy Corcoran Kennedy.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to break that request because I have to refer to a wonderful film which was made on the Grand Canal under the Percent for Art scheme, and I really want to take the opportunity to let people know about it here today, particularly those that won't get to go on the canal. If they have a look at this film, it was shot from Shannon Harbour to Edenderry in 2012, and it was part of a Percent for Art scheme where 3 Offaly artists actually used the travel along the canal to inspire some new creative work of theirs, and I think it's a wonderful actually advertisement for using the Grand Canal, and in fact I went to the launch of it in the head office of Waterways Ireland down there. I have a number of questions that I'd like to ask Waterways Ireland. One is in relation to the winter mooring permit, and whether or not you have plans to introduce the opportunity for a winter mooring permit on the canals and the Barrow, similar to that you have on the Shannon. Also in relation to, I'm very familiar because I was raised in West Offaly, I'm very familiar with Belmont and Shannon Harbour area, and I was very conscious of the difficulties that are being experienced down in Shannon Harbour with old rotting boats and all the rest of it, and whether you intend to explore the possibility of changing the terms and conditions for houseboats, as you know, you can see the difficulties that the current terms and conditions caused in terms of what was happening down there, and if you intend to change that approach to it. Also, in terms of the canals and the Barrow navigation, what do you see as would be an obstacle to the development of them, and also how you think that the social and economic benefits that the suggested visitors permit is going to have, how do you see that impacting on communities that are adjacent to the waterways? And also, in terms of your promotion of the canal and the Barrow, how are you promoting that from a navigation point of view?
Thank you. Next question is Deputy Clerk.
Yeah, thanks. I'll get to the point, one point in indulging in the preamble. Ms Livingston mentioned earlier the sort of the net benefits to the economy, and you quoted a figure, I think, of 80 to 100 million. That's an annual figure. Will you expand a bit on that and just tell us, in respect of what different areas that benefit would accrue to the Exchequer? The capital budgeting for Waterways Ireland and the catering for that, how does your body as an organisation cater for that? Because it seems to me that if there's going to be capital spend, upgrade, etc., there's clearly going to have to be a budgeting arrangement for it. Dispute resolution, which clearly we're talking about, there's two diametrically opposed views being expressed here today in relation to the new bylaw proposal. What sort of mechanism, or does a mechanism exist for the resolution of disputes or for the contrary views? The exacting demands, which clearly the bylaws or the new bylaws or updated bylaws are going to have for the users of the canal, what are the overall implications in terms of the financial demands on the users of the canals and the waterways? And is it possible that people, because of economic circumstances, may be forced out of the system and may have to decommission their boats and yachts?
Thanks, Deputy Clerk. Deputy Feeney and Deputy Humphreys.
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose I could preface what my contribution at the outset was by saying that I'm from Graignamanagh, so we do have a great relationship with Waterways Ireland, albeit that the Canal Byelaws have caused a great deal of angst and stress in the area. And if I was to point out, I think you will see this from your submission, the two most important things that are sticking out here are the 5-day rule, which I believe is completely unworkable, because if that was in force even at the moment, there is no way anybody could have moved their boat in the last number of months because of the flood that exists on the river. The other one is and I think you need to make a distinction between people who use their boats for just pleasuring on the weekends and people who actually reside on their boats, because from what I can see, there's not very many of them. They're not retired millionaires from the Caribbean, I think, so they're extremely concerned about the increases in the fees that they might be asked to pay. But I suppose it's just to say that just to take cognizance of, what the boat users are actually saying, because these are the practitioners. Anybody who takes a boat from Monster down to Graignamanagh knows that it takes you possibly 3 weekends to do that, so that there's no way the 5-day rule is going to be able to, be enforced there. I do understand that you have difficulties, and I do understand that there are towns now that are and can be considered boat graveyards. But there is also another area in the submission which probably didn't take cognizance either of the fact there are destinations along the river, and particularly along the River Barrow, that are preferred destinations. That are preferred destinations, because boat users tend to congregate in areas where other boat users are. So that you need to take note of that as well. And to move 3 kilometres one way or the other, there may be no place for you to moor, even if you do get to move. So I leave it at that, Chairperson. There's lots we could say, but we do welcome your investment as well.
Thank you, Deputy Feeney. Deputy Humphreys.
Thank you, Chair. Can I kind of just give a slightly change in direction and just talk about the Naveina for a minute? And I thank you very much for supplying me with the Frank Jackson Marine Survey of the ship, which has found it quite useful, but it seems to be quite limited for a 41-metre vessel. And I'm just wondering, would you be in agreement with that? And I'm just wondering, would you be able to assist me that the lower tanks, which are under the floor, are 18 inches deep, and there doesn't seem to be any survey in relation to those, and that's for the ship frame and keel. are contained, and obviously they're quite inaccessible because of the amount of rubbish and combustibles that are on the ship. So I'm just, have you any further information in relation to that? In relation to the dry docking of the ship, it's going into a 200-year-old private, 200-year-old protected dry dock, and I'm just concerned there that the ship itself is not securely moored within that dry dock. So I just, whether there has been opportunities, because obviously even from growing up and living in the area, I'd be very concerned that any damage would be done to that dry dock. And just in relation to the monitoring of the contractors, somebody mentioned it to me now, and I didn't witness myself, so I'm not quite sure whether it has happened, but there's been some dumping of concrete near the vintage slug mechanisms. So I'd be grateful if that could be looked at. And if the ship does need to be continued to be broken up, really for a proper assessment, all that rubbish needs to be removed. So I'm just wondering, you know, is there an opportunity? And I know Waterways are acting as facilitators, so that I don't mean to be anyway critical in what I'm saying. And just like the ship itself is probably one of the last remaining examples of a riveted ship built in Dublin. That same year as I was born, so like it's a little bit of a 1958, so it's very early to be going to the scrap heap, as they say.
But for TD anyway.
So I certainly would have a keen interest in the seeing that can this be preserved, because it is part of the maritime history, both of Dublin, because it was built in Dublin, and of its historical connection between Galway and the Arden Islands. So if you could just kind of address those points. And just the other safety concern I would have, if it is in danger of sinking, is it safe to have contractors on board? Should it be properly dry docked before any demolition or deconstruction of it takes place?
Thank you, Deputy. So we might answer those questions. And Mr. Ross.
As Deputy Humphreys rightly said, Waterways Ireland is facilitating this particular project. Waterways Ireland doesn't own the Navina. It's owned privately by the Irish Nautical Trust. The Frank Jackson Marine Survey was done privately for the Irish Nautical Trust, and Waterways Ireland is relying on that survey for its information on the boat. As Waterways Ireland doesn't own the boat, Waterways Ireland has no proposals to further do a marine survey on it. As you'll have picked up from the marine survey to date, it does say it's fragile.
There is a proposal for an independent marine survey, but not carried out by Waterways or at your expense.
Yep. The Navina is in the dry dock at the moment. We have moved it into the dry dock basically to secure it and remove it from the main dock, where if it did sink, it would pollute the main dock. And Waterways Ireland's proposal is to await the outcome of the Save the Navina group's proposals to see what they can place on board, and thereafter Waterways Ireland will consider what to do with it. But Waterways Ireland at the moment, its proposal to scrap it, we believe that it's suitably placed in the dry dock and we've secured from there. We do realise that there are security issues with it. It was one of the ropes were released off at the weekend, and we asked the contractor, and I think the Irish Nautical Trust came back and secured the boat on Monday morning. In that particular area there is going to be an ongoing issue of that type of thing with it, but we have our own harbour master there, and we have the Irish Nautical Trust keeping an eye on it. To do anything else would be significant cost to us at the moment, and we don't propose to go down that way at the moment. The presentation from the Save the Navina Trust is being given to us tomorrow, so we'll see what that gives. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to address Deputy Captain Kennedy, he had a number of questions for Waterways Ireland in relation to winter moor, terms and conditions of houseboats in Shannon Harbour. Obstacles to developments and that. We'll take those questions.
Yes, winter moorings are presently available on the River Shannon, and that allows vessels from the 1st of November until the 31st of March each year for a fee to leave their vessels in the public harbours. And obviously that is what is being proposed here by the IWAI and perhaps the Heritage Boat Association also. Vessel owners pay the fee at the start of November. and as I say, they can leave their vessels then in the public harbour until the 31st of March, and thereafter the 5-day rule kicks in. We're very conscious, the enforcement of the bylaws falls to my responsibility, and we're very much aware that people are engaged in their pastime. So enforcement is done with the small, very much with the small e. We're not out there rattling the cage every day of the week and getting people to move on. If they have a genuine excuse for, or reason rather, for wanting to stay beyond the 5 days, then we accommodate them. For example, that can be, somebody had a death or communion or family event or something like that. And in that case, we endeavour to accommodate them, and we always will. As the Chief Executive said earlier, it's only when vessels become persistent harbour hoggers, unauthorised moors, that we move them, and that can be at the end of a 3-month boating season. And that would really be the extent of it. So they're not, the idea that anybody is removed from the navigation after 5 days would be incorrect.
Chair, my question was in relation to whether there's any intention to provide winter mooring on the canal and the Barrow, the canals and the Barrow. I know that there is some on the river.
It's certainly something that has been raised in the consultation. It's not something that we had thought of providing, because if people have an extended mooring permit, i.e. they have somewhere that they can permanently moor their boat, they don't need another winter mooring permit.
But I suppose the question is, I suppose, are you considering extending that to the canals and the Barrow under this consultation? You're considering it because it's obviously coming in as a submission.
We certainly will consider all of the things. The reason it wasn't in it is, I said, that if people already owned an extended mooring permit, they have the right to stay in one position for the whole year, not just for the winter months.
Yes, but I mean, can you see a situation where it would suit some people to moor for the winter on the canal or the Barrow and be allowed to do that?
Yes, and I mean, certainly we'll look at it. For we will.
Questions in relation to a dispute resolution mechanism, and also asked about exchequer benefits and capital budgets.
In terms of the exchequer benefits, those were calculated, and it's the whole benefit in terms of the boating activity. That's from the per diem spend based on the board Fulcher figures for people who use their boats, how often they go out, what they spend in terms of day visitor, fuel. It also takes in the purchase and all of the industry behind boats, private marinas, boat repair, capital build. So it's an all-encompassing figure, and it was recently updated 2 years ago.
What was the current estimate?
Sorry?
What's the current estimate?
The current estimate is between 80 to 100 million, is the annual value.
Quite significant. Huh?
It's a substantive industry. And I mean, the people have spoken today from villages and towns where it is, a very significant driver in a local economy.
There's a question in relation to dispute resolution mechanisms.
The dispute resolution mechanism, I think I would have 2 things to say about this. First of all, there's been criticism about that we have no mechanism when people pay a security deposit. As part of an EMP, we take a refundable €250 security deposit. And the reason we did that was when I spoke earlier about it's cheaper to abandon your boat or all of your rubbish. And there isn't a dispute resolution mechanism. Now, we can only use that to recover direct costs from dealing with refuse or an abandoned boat someone's left behind. And that is something we're actively considering. How do we get an independent avenue to do that? With regard to it, in respect to fixed penalty notices, until these bylaws are completed, we haven't worked through the mechanics of how fixed penalty notices, all the background to that, because this is a consultation process. And whether or not they will come to fruition is still to be agreed. And I just don't know. We'll find out and write back to the committee. I don't know whether within the legislation it's possible to have some form of discretion. I just don't know, but we will find out and revert.
Chairman, it just seems to me that it would be worth exploring that possibility, because it could come to terms with some of the difficulties that clearly have arisen.
Yes. I mean, as Charles and I have tried to outline, the current bylaws provide commissioners with the ability to grant any form of extended stay. And, we certainly are not averse to dispute resolution. We're not in the business of being car park attendants, where you stay over 5 minutes, we're going to sticker you. It's not that type of business. But there is a need for people who persistently do not try to work in the better interest of all of the users.
Your final comment?
There were a couple of other questions there that I'd asked that I didn't get a response to. One was in relation to the current approach on the terms of conditions for houseboats. The other one was in relation to the obstacles that might potentially be in place to prevent the future development of the canals and the Barrow navigation. The other one was in relation to how you're promoting the canals and the Barrow from a navigation point of view, and then also the visitor permit, what the benefits to the local communities would be from a social and economic point of view.
I work in reverse order, and you can keep me if I drop any. The visitor permit, we very much hope to bring, there are 14,000 boats on the navigations. There are 500 on the canals. Not all of the boats in the other navigations will fit on the canals, but a fair percentage of them will. And we want to attract those people to come onto the canals and make significant journeys. Come and join the rallies, come and join the wonderful events that the IWAI run, and increase the number of people using them and increase the benefits economically and recreationally to those local communities. In terms of how do we promote the canals, we have worked very closely with Bord Fáilte, NITB and Tourism Ireland through the Lakelands and Inland Waterways Initiative to place the inland navigations at the very centre of Ireland's tourist product when it's promoted both here and abroad. And it's by pooling our resources we've tried to maximise the impact of that. We also work closely with local authorities, with leaders, in terms of bringing developments and promotion on a local scale together. In terms of the challenges we face, like all public bodies, we have declining resources, and someone asked about how capital expenditure was funded. It's funded by each jurisdiction that we work in, and again, as for all bodies, that has been a declining resource. In terms of reduced funding available, we've had 24% reduction in the funding available to Waterways Ireland over the last 3-year period, and we'll have further reductions over the next 3-year period. Sorry, I've lost. What was the
conditions of houseboats?
Terms and conditions of houseboats. Certainly, it's something that we are actively looking at. These bylaws give certainty for people who want to choose as a lifestyle choice and live on their boat. Previously, there's no provision for them. They couldn't be managed. They didn't exist in the bylaws. So I can appreciate people's concern about losing that way of life, but there are some people who live on their boats who cruise and move continuously. Those people only need to buy the €130 permit. They don't need an extended mooring permit because they're always on the move. For people who wish to move in one location, we are trying to create houseboat locations close to where they're located so that somewhere they have lived and want to live. So we are sensitive to meeting the needs and making sensible provision going forward to see that everybody can be included.
Because that was the question I asked. I didn't get a response to. And it would be,
because I have a visitor outside.
Hazel would say just one, and it is one that has come up, and it's probably with her, but you're not parochial or whatever, but Hazel Hatch and Clondalkin, if there is going from 136 or 126 to 3,500, that's a fear. So maybe you would comment on that, because there's a lot of fear around the area.
Is in the Grand Canal dock, in the city centre of Dublin.
And if there's a houseboat there, then what does it do?
It will be 3,500.
Yes,
as I said earlier,
it is currently paying
€152 because that is the only fee available to us. But there is nobody.
So it's going from 150 to 3,500.
If you choose to live in the Grand Canal dock in a houseboat mooring, but there is nobody.
And people who have chosen, say, for 30 years to live, what happens? Do they just?
There is nobody who's resided in the Grand Canal dock for more than 2 years.
Nobody for more than 2. Thank you.
There's nobody in that situation in that location.
Just in terms, we've highlighted today the issues around the fears and concerns that members have. We talked about 80 to 100 million euro being spent. That's been spent by our members. They are the people who are delivering this economic value to the small towns and villages of Ireland. and they're quite happy to do it. They're proud to spend their holidays and their pastimes in Ireland, and that's what we're about, and that's what we're trying to protect. And we want to make sure that into the future that money can stay within this country. We need it, and we want to be able to do it on waterways that are vibrant and lively. Thank you very much for your time today, Caroline. Members.
Okay. And the other people from the Heritage Board?
Again, Gaeltacht, I think we thank you for the opportunity to make our points today. We believe that the agenda that we were concerned about has actually been central to the discussion, so we're quite satisfied that what we had to say has been aired. We would again probably repeat that we felt the discussion we had with Waterways Ireland was constructive. We hope our assessment in that is correct, and the proof of the pudding would be in the eating when obviously we see what comes along. But we, at this stage, welcome the fact that this process has taken place, and we would like, of course, an opportunity to comment on whatever further considerations Waterways Ireland would come up with at the end of this process, or at the next stage of this process.
Okay, can I thank the three organisations for your attendance this afternoon and for engaging with members in terms of questions and answers on the topics. You are now free to go. We'll suspend for a couple of minutes and allow our next visitor to take his seat, our next guest. Thank you very much indeed.